Today we're talking about one guy and how much we trust him. Hey, it's Soul, and this is Warcraft Weekly, listening to your biggest concerns and not taking them very seriously. You can help support the channel by liking this video, subscribing for WoW coverage, and catching me where I'm live. We'll start off light. When is Midnight going to launch? Version 3.7.3. The question rears its head once again after the player housing event in Boston, where a few off-the-cuff answers have been translated into clues, to use the term loosely. So what they say? I have the audio, although unfortunately I can't post it to the public, but I can paraphrase. Now, first, I was told straight up housing's going to release winter of 2025. We kind of knew that already though, thanks to the roadmap, and it's a 2025 roadmap, not 2026, and we see that cute little housing icon there. However, winter is a whole last season that begins December 21st and ends March 20th. The roadmap is old, and like anything, it's subject to change. The following was also said during a big roundtable with content creators and media when a question was asked about why housing was announced early rather than be unveiled with the reveal of Midnight, a reveal that won't happen until like a few months from now. Paraphrasing, they said, so when it comes out, it's a Midnight feature, but not everything in an expansion rollout happens at the exact same time. You have the 0.0 patch, and then when the access to the new continent or space rolls out, and so you know the housing will come out somewhere in that soup of time. That's right, folks. In the world of Warcraft, time is a soup to be stirred and sipped. Anyway, there's a few things to point out. The devs were answering a question not quite related to the release date of housing or the expansion. It just happened to go there, thanks Stratnos. But the words were said, so we gotta think it over. They brought up the 0.0 patch and access to the new continent or space as if they were like release stages. Now I'm going to put words in their mouth and make the claim when they said access, they might mean early access, so it sounds like that's coming back. But what kind of early access are we talking about? If we're talking about the weekend early access like for War Within, that's going to mean housing might not be playable until well into the pre-expansion patch. Now someone like me who wants to use early access for gold making, kind of sucks that I may want to hold off on messing with housing until well into like the economic boom and the leveling rush. Folks who are all about housing though, hey, more power to them. But it would just be cool if it was out sooner. I go back to my early roadmap predictions though, when I was of the belief player housing itself would be an early access thing. So just like demon hunters and evokers, housing might be right in for the pre-patch, or it could be available in an earlier patch like allied races were a thing between Legion and Battle for Azeroth. That way folks have a bigger soup to enjoy between the season content and the Legion remix, don't forget about that, and of course, player housing. Now, speaking of the season, I've long been a proponent of there being a season 4 of The War Within, but I'm known to be wrong very, very often, and it wouldn't be fair if I didn't at least describe a possible War Within scenario without a season 4, along with, of course, a midnight release date. So how would this work? Let's refer to our handy-dandy schedule. In less than a month, on June 17th, we can expect the 11.1.7 patch to launch, and there doesn't seem to be anything to suggest otherwise. The 8-week schedule between patches has been very reliable so far, so if we just count another 8 weeks, patch 11.2 will launch August 12th, with Season 3 starting like the week after. Now that very week, Gamescom takes place. As gaming's biggest convention, it's a pretty safe guess Blizzard's gonna be there, and this lines up with the roadmap. We might see a midnight reveal with an announcement that the alpha will begin soon, because it kinda sorta has to. By the way, historically, unlike patches, Blizzard's totally fine sharing some details of the next expansion even before the final season of a raid is available. Now, if we count another 8 weeks, October 7th may bring us patch 11.2.5, and another 8 weeks, again, 11.2.7, which is where things get kind of murky. Now, last year, we had a 10-week patch gap instead of 8 weeks between 11.0.7 and 11.1, likely due to the holiday breaks. Now, we're going to pretend that's going to be a thing again. So if the next patch happens to be the midnight pre-patch, that might happen February 10th. A 5-week pre-patch period that's going to be based on past expansions. That would mean a worldwide release of Midnight March 16th, 4 days before spring begins, making The War Within like a 19 or so month expansion. Now, date-wise, this fits. Everything's cool. So let's cram a little bit more, we'll put in some more events. We'll backtrack, and a little bit after October, so just after patch 11.2.5, the Midnight Alpha can begin, meaning 5 months of testing just like The War Within. The Mesta Pandaria remix lasted 3 months, which makes me think okay, we can kind of slot this into the 11.2.7 patch to end 1 week before Midnight's launch. As for player housing though, there's a decent chance it'll be available as a limited early access thing with 11.2.7, since Midnight's going to be well into alpha testing around December, and I don't see them transitioning into beta during the holidays, although that would be kind of fun from a player standpoint. Now all this seems to fit again. There's no problems outside of disastrous delays, and there's no Season 4. While this works, I do wonder how people are going to handle there being no lull. Now, I know it sounds like I'm framing like that's a bad thing or something, but it's also going to be very different. People handle the lull differently. Like, people use the spare time to do achievements and, casual stuff. Others will go like on a full-on break from the game, a little vacation for the sake of mental health until it's time to come back and, come back to the grind. Part of the consequence of the Season 4s are, in so few words, it's recycling the old raids and dungeons that we just went through, although we can look at it as a victory lap too. Let's do the raids that we missed. This is our last chance to collect transmog before we have to wait for legacy mode. Personally, I would like it more if Season 4 was a thing, but a heck of a lot shorter and more arcadey, as in, it's very easy and accessible, where people are just blasting through content with very easy to get gear, almost to a point where maybe people would only play an expansion during the 4th season because of the super reduced grinds. But anyway, I digressed. Season 4 feels tiring for some people who'd rather have nothing to do before the next expansion, so I kind of get that. My question though is, what happens when there is no nothing to do? Like, I'm kind of wondering if people are going to get really burned out because the game, always has a little something to look forward to, or, a little something just around the corner. In this case, it's not so little, but, But gamers have been wanting the end of the lull for a long time. They hate admitting when they're wrong, but what do you think? The other week, Senior Game Director Ion Hazzikostas spoke at a game developer conference in Sweden. It was a very good talk with a healthy retrospective of what he and the team have learned over the years, mistakes they've made, and solutions that turned out to be still mistakes. And I wouldn't even say he ever lands on a super positive, like, hey, I'm going to pat myself on the back moment. It's more like, okay, this is where we've landed after all this time, and we're going to continue to make shifts prioritizing the needs of players rather than try to have the devs mold them. But I'm going to revisit that thought in just a bit. I can't understate how good the talk was though. Like, I came off of it feeling pretty happy. Like, he carried the air of an experienced game developer. I mean, that's what we should expect for a dude who's been on the game for over 15 years and has been the longest serving game director at almost 10. I'm going to leave a link to it in the video description, and if you can make it through the whole thing, like it's an hour long, I would love to get your thoughts. I'm not going to give a further summary or commentary. In fact, you're worse off if you were to go around and just look at bullet points. Because I noticed from the video itself and the Reddit thread that was linking it, the comments are glowing. They're like, oh man, we love hearing him talk, God bless, and that sort of thing. But if you look at the comments on Wowhead, which summarized it, oh, dude, the commenters are like, they're mostly responding to the talking points like, oh man, this is like the worst dev ever. It's unfortunate because the article did its due diligence, but, just like anything, it polishes away all the nuance. It leaves out the words that led to some of these statements, and it makes the tone of his talk come off like a series of platitudes. And that sounds, that has some very arrogant energy. I want to frame this as a well-reasoned and significant talk that helps to build trust and faith in the dev team. And yet, we got 11.1.5. I gotta be careful talking about this patch and need to draw a distinction between me as a player and me as a commentator. Now, as a player, I think this patch is fine. Like, I don't look at the spacing of stuff as like delayed or time-gated content, but something that's not unlike being at a restaurant that serves a multiple course meal, like a carefully planned out series of dishes to suit the changes in appetite and the mood and what have you. Okay, I can already think of more than a few witty retorts on the restaurant analogy, including, sir, this is not a restaurant, this is the world of Warcraft. But anyway, I know when I'm faced with a bunch of stacking activities or chores or whatever you want to call it, back in old school WoW, I tend to zone out really fast. Like, I remember how I felt during patch 9.1 of Shadowlands, where I gotta, knock out Korthia for the week and the Covenant Assaults for the Domination Shard things and get renown credit so I can do the next leg of of the campaign and get more progress towards the Archivist Codex, I think. And then I got to do a round of Torghast because I want to move my legendary power from my boots to my wrist or something, you know. Today's WoW, it still has the classics. Like, I'm still doing my round of delves for Gilded Crest, but the rewards are much more direct and impactful. I'm spending much less time preparing to play the game, and I'm just diving straight into progression. The grinds are still there, right? But we can end the day feeling that we got something more meaningful done. For those of you who are unhappy and you can't stand the delayed releases and the time gating and so on, I see you. I believe you. I don't think you are wrong. I just urge you to accept that, you know what, not everyone feels the same way either. And the world of Warcraft is bigger than any one voice, no matter how loud or obnoxious or sexy it happens to be. When we take a step back though, and we look at the whole of this season, which we still haven't seen yet because 11.1.7 won't be out for a few more weeks, I look at this spread of seasonal content with the additional events. I see them as layered in such a way as to not overwhelm too many players, even after all of it is active at the same time. Like, by the time many people hit their season goals, like, okay, here's something like Nightfall to scratch the little collection itch, but it also doubles up as an easy way for latecomers to easily kit themselves with veteran gear. Some folks moved on from it, but it still exists now as a way to jump into the season late. While we're in this current stage, we're a little over halfway through the season with some additional challenges and milestones to hit. It's not exactly catch-up per se, but it's a progression that shares similar vibes to delves with the accessibility. Now, it could have been something else. Heck, it could have been the overcharged delves that took this space, but we're gonna get that a little bit later instead. In the post-borrowed power era, Blizzard's approach shifted from stretching out the same kind of content for months and months and months to dropping activities that feel relevant for like a month and some, before the relevance is more or less just cosmetic only, and then something new comes along. It doesn't sound like such a bad idea on paper until we see players suffering the day-to-day wait. It's like the double-edged sword of knowing something is, just around the corner. Gamers look at these schedules and roadmaps and they lose their patience quick, knowing that the thing that they want isn't here yet. So they twist that likely good intention into like this scheme to farm engagement and maintain subscribers. Now, some people just don't like that 4-course meal experience and they'd rather just have everything at once. They want to go to a buffet, or they want people to be like, hey, yo, just haul it out when it comes off the pan. And there's nothing wrong with that. But again, when we take a step back, the only limited time event this season, if we don't count the leveling boost, is the upcoming Dastardly Duos thing. The content isn't laid out in the way where we can slam it all at once, but it is designed in a way that if we don't care about what's around the corner, cool, we can just take a break and put it off for later. Like, we can get the food to go to. And that's enough of the analogy. You guys are absolutely going to tear me apart for that one. So I look at this patch and even the horrific mission unlocks as more of a flashpoint in the grand scheme of things. Like, I can think of worse things to fret over. And speaking of, the game will be dead by the time midnight launches if we're to believe the doomsaying after this recent article from our favorite game director regarding add-ons and UI improvements. Apparently the rapture's coming, and the otherwise well thought out and uplifting talk from earlier this week was crushed and reforged into a mallet with which to bludgeon the WoW team. I'll link to the interviews below, and in this case I will summarize what's trying to be done here, and it seems the changes won't start coming until at least well into Season 3 of The War Within. By now, most of you have heard that the WoW team has a long-term plan of doing a big combat overhaul in several stages. One is to take a look at the UI. We saw what was a pretty sad rollout of the cooldown manager, and by sad, I mean they released a concept draft that isn't even remotely competitive to current add-ons. I conclude this is an indicator of how long it'll actually take to complete this overhaul. Other bullet points in the interview include audio and visual cues to make it very obvious when an enemy mob or a boss is going to do like some big attack that should be kicked or stunned. I think of a mob that's about to do a big shadow bolt lightning thing and he gets back and starts crackling with energy or something. I'm borrowing a little bit from an earlier interview with Max and Dratnos, but they also want to improve on debuff visibility for dot classes. They want to identify where there are diminishing returns on crowd control like stuns. They want to tell you when tank swaps need to happen in game and more. The bigger but more nuanced change is that encounter design will shift in such a way that players won't need to have add-ons that act as multiple eyeballs that track all these different things at once. For example, in higher level encounters or keys, players count on watching each other's cooldowns to chain CC or interrupt. If you overuse your kicks or stops, that might mean not having that kick or stop on the next pack, and the risk of death goes up by a lot. Now, one solution to this is, okay, let's just not have those packs anymore. Let's not have the encounter be designed around having every raid cooldown fire off in like this super exact sequence with no errors or gaps. And let's not create scenarios of having to coordinate 20 people to do all these different things at once with coordination that's simply not learnable by human beings, with, communication that voice chat and pings just can't do, which, build that dependent on add-ons. The solution to that would be to instead of having only 2 seconds for people to respond, give them like 4 or 5 seconds instead. Basically sufficient time for a player, a human being, to see what's happening on screen, to make a decision or a call out, and then act on it. Now, these are all speculative, these are theoretical changes that they want to make. But ultimately, they probably want to get to a point where between comms and markers and pings, that's all that's needed to help players coordinate movement and assignments. This is, it should be great news. It's exactly what players have been asking for in this whole arms race with add-ons. Blizzard they're losing, they're giving up, they're conceding. They're going to end the war by first disarming themselves. Instead of making encounters way more complex as they have been for years, they're gonna not just tone it down, but they're gonna take some steps back. The common refrain I'd hear up until now is, hey, you know what? Blizzard should stop making encounters so complicated that we need these add-ons in the first place. Duh. So what has folks in a panic is as the dust clears and the fights are less complicated and the dependence on add-ons for this inhuman tracking goes way down, the WoW team will enter the final stages of this combat overhaul and start deprecating certain add-on functionality. Now, the list seems pretty intimidating. The most significant change, they're going to go after weak auras and other add-on functionality that assigns players a role and where to go. We won't be able to see a visual of our party members' cooldowns. Add-ons that alter nameplates to identify scary mobs or ability cast, that's probably going to go away too. He said specifically that incoming heals or specialized buffs or debuffs, they won't be trackable via add-on, but if they needed to, they should be just built into the base game. And so far, that's kind of it. Now, you might have noticed I framed all of this in chronological order. So the team is going to bring in all these improvements and changes and whatever to encounter design, while most likely leaving add-ons alone until they see that it's a good time to start shutting these functions down, because how do you get that sort of input, right? I said earlier, the cooldown manager might be an example of how fast or slow this process is going to be. So Midnight to very first season might have a bunch of these changes in place with add-ons also working, resulting in some very odd reactions from players, maybe even some negative reactions. It's not going to surprise me if some folks in the mid to high level game are like, oh my god, they really dumbed this game down, because here I am standing here for days waiting for this thing to soak. Dude, Blizz, stop making the game for one button casuals, yada yada yada. But what if in patch 12.0.5, Blizzard's like, okay, cool, boop, and they turn off all this different add-on functionality of, this combat related stuff that let them respond that fast? Would they feel the same way? No matter how fast or slow they do this, it's going to feel like ripping off a band-aid over and over. It's going to hurt. At the moment, gamers and commentators are posing the question, can we trust the devs to deliver on what is going to be a huge change to WoW's bread and butter, the combat? And it's not going to surprise you, a lot of folks be like, nope, no trust at all. There's still folks with an axe to grind, and rightfully so, over things like AoE capping and putting some abilities on the global cooldown and turning survival hunters into a melee spec. And some people still spontaneously wake up in a cold sweat shouting back, bring back reforging, and so much more. And I also want to make it clear, this focus is mostly on advanced combat, higher level stuff. They're not going to be touching transmog or roleplay, quality of life add-ons that just make the day-to-day of WoW much easier to do. Now, even on top of that, I honestly don't have much of a stake with this change. I don't have very strong takes. As a heroic raider and a KSM person, or at least an almost KSM person, I don't identify with the dependence on add-ons, at least combat-based add-ons. Timers do help with learning encounter design, but So does practice and repetition and repair builds. The advantage I think I have for me and my guild is that we raid semi-blind with no advanced knowledge of encounters, so the timers I see, like, I don't even know what they mean for a while. My team goes through the motions of learning through death. And so going through these new motions of not having dependence on these add-ons, well, it's not like we used most of these anyway. Like, I'll send us out with the worst idea ever and we die horrible deaths, but maybe we learn something, and I ingrained that into the team and that's become part of the game. However, I do get that sort of mentality, that sort of approach, it just doesn't work in the pub world. Arguably the majority of players, where knowledge is expected, or some players are going to just phone it in and deal with the churn of bad runs until they manage a hard carry or something like that. And I think the big challenge these gamers may face is that, oh gosh, they're going to have to communicate more, or maybe they won't communicate more and they're going to blame Blizzard for having something being taken away from them. What I do wonder, though, is how raid difficulties are going to feel, because Mythic Plus has more of this incremental scaling. It's not that big of a deal, but the move between the 4 raid difficulties, they feel very different from numbers to complexity. It could be that the combat overhaul will be felt the most in Mythic raids and then less in lower difficulties. Or is Mythic supposed to feel like heroic complexity? Will normal feel like Raid Finder? Will Raid Finder feel like follower dungeons? That might be asking for too simplistic of an explanation, or even worse, don't give me an analogy, those are just the worst. And that's the show. I want to hear from you folks. How are Horrific Visions feeling this week? Now, I'm a bit of a mix. Capping talents to that first row does suck, but being able to hard farm my way towards maxing out the tributes, it more than canceled that out. I mean, it enabled me to at least 4-mask it this week. Mechanically, the visions haven't changed, but the reward and feedback loop was definitely given the current gen treatment. Ask anyone else how far they got in week 1 of the original Visions, and you'll get a good contrast of what the feature was when it was a main season feature versus a mid-season distraction. Next week, we're going to enter Orgrimmar, and crazies like me are going to try and push to complete the full 8-mask experience for, achievements and gear and crests and, well, most importantly, pride. But you can also expect another set of guides. One is going to be like the more beginnerish walkthrough from pole to pole. Another is going to be the, quote, easiest way to clear a 5-mask vision, and we'll see where we go from there. For now, let's wrap it up by thanking all of you who joined me for the streams and the guide making. To our wonderful, wonderful patrons, thank you so much. And to you, viewer, you made it to the end, you fed the algorithm, and I am grateful. Please like the video, subscribe for more WoW coverage, catch me live, and I'll catch you later. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay breezy.